Hi, everyone. Welcome to a segment on Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is on demand and supply. And on this segment, we're going to focus on defining demand and then explaining why demand curve slopes down, a couple of technical reasons, and then explaining how we get market demand. Market demand is normally what we look at, but we start by explaining demand tables and demand lines. So what is demand? Well, people have a very strong intuitive feel for what demand is, but of course, in a course like this, we have to explain it a little more formally. So it's the quantities consumers are willing and able to buy over a period of time at various prices. So it's a mouthful, the definition, but let's break this down to understand what we really mean by it, what we mean by demand, and separate out a few things. So demand is the quantities consumers are willing and able to buy over a period of time at various prices. They must be willing and they must have the ability, both of those things, before they're considered part of demand. So for example, there's a beautiful $150,000 camper van that I'd like to buy, $150,000 small little van to camp in. So I have to be willing and able to be part of the demand for that thing. So I would love to buy it. I'm totally willing to buy that thing because it'd be just perfect for me. But you know what? I don't have $150,000 that I can spare right now. So I don't have the ability to pay for it. So I'm not part of the demand curve. Flip that around, maybe I'm just super filthy rich. I mean, I get paid a lot of money teaching at SAIT. So I've easily got $150,000 to buy that van. So I've got the ability, but you know what? I think it would be absolutely ridiculous for me to buy the van because I'd use it maybe 2 weeks out of the year and that $150,000 investment would just sit for the rest of the time. So I'm not at all willing. I have the ability, but I'm not at all willing. So I hope that clarifies. You need to be both willing and able to be part of the demand curve. And to understand demand the way we want us to is it has to be demand over a certain period, because certainly demand for something over 10 years, when you add it all up, is greater than demand for something over 10 minutes. But both of them are relevant, so we have to pick a period of time that we look at demand over, and usually we say it's a year, but it can be a month or it can be demand over a week. So the period of time component is very important in understanding the demand relationship. And the last one is various prices. So we're looking at demand over a period of time, consumers willing and able to buy, but over a range of prices. So it's showing the relationship between the quantities demanded and the price. And it's this whole relationship we look at. Price is the most important determinant there, and we have to invoke something called ceteris paribus. It means everything else remains the same. The reason we have to bring that in is that I might want to look at a very logical thing where as price goes up, people will buy less of the product. However, what if their incomes are doubling at the same time? Maybe they'll buy more of the product. So it'll look like that as price goes up, people buy more. And that doesn't make sense at all. So we have to lock out and say all incomes have to remain the same. And when we do the scientific analysis, or when the economists do it, that's what they lock out, and they just determine the relationship between price and quantity. Okay, so now that we understand the demand and the sort of the formal definition behind it, we're going to look at a demand schedule, which is actually a table. I don't know why we don't call it table, but we have to call it schedule, and a demand curve, which is actually a straight line, but we call it a demand curve. So the schedule is just a table of numbers, and the demand curve is just the graph of those numbers. So let's first take a look at the table on the next slide. Here it is. It shows on the left various prices from 17 all the way up to 22, and the quantities that people buy, or let's just say this is me, the quantities that I buy at the low price of 17 should be relatively high to the quantity that I'd buy down here at a relatively high price of 2. So at 17, I'm willing to buy 7 cases. As the price goes up to 18, I only want 6, and so on. Once it gets up to 22, well, you know what? I'm only buying 2 cases per month. Okay, so that's what the table is showing. Keep in mind, there's I'll get this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 quantity demandeds, but there's only one demand. Demand is this whole relationship. So 6 quantities demanded, but only one demand. We have to clarify that because it'll mess up all our other work. So zero in on that and make sure you understand that, what I just said there. So here's the graph. All we've done is graph these things. So we've taken 17 and a quantity of 7. Well, there's a price of 17. I go and I place a dot at a quantity of 7. Then I go to 18, and the associated quantity demanded is 6. So I take 6 and I put a dot. And then I go to 19, the price. Quantity demanded is 5. So I plot 19 and 5 down here. And there's my dot. And when I draw a line through it, this is going to be messy. That's my demand curve. So again, notice I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 quantities demanded, but only one demand. It's the whole relationship. This whole thing is demand. I know it seems a bit strange initially as we're trying to sort it out, but please do sort it out. So let's go to the next slide and show what happens. There's my demand curve. That's what we said. It's the whole thing is demand, or the whole table is the demand schedule. And let's take a look at what happens when we change price. And this will help clarify a few things. Keep in mind that that whole table there is the demand schedule. So let's look at point A. We've already got this curve. So the price was 17, quantity demanded should be 7. Price is 17, quantity demanded is 7, yes. Then it looks like the price went up to 18. So hypothetically, if the price went up to 18, we go across to this curve, come down, quantity demanded fell. Okay, that makes sense. Price went up, quantity demanded fell. So we moved along the demand curve from point A to point B, and quantity demanded fell right here. So I'm just going to click to the next slide, see if it overlaps. Yep. And we know from what we were saying is as the price went up, quantity demanded decreased. That's because we drew the arrow along here, and quantity went from 7 down to 6. And that is a movement along the existing demand curve. So price increased, quantity demanded decreased. Now the question that's going to blow everybody away is what happened to demand? And the answer is nothing. The demand curve is still there. It didn't move. Demand didn't move. We'll look at that next class. Demand didn't move. But quantity demanded changed. So now we want to formally explain why that demand curve slopes down and to the right. And I mean, it's obvious, well, when prices go lower, people are going to want to buy more. That's true, but there's a little bit sort of more background information behind it. And the first one is the income effect. And that just simply means that when the price drops, you actually have more money and you can buy more stuff. So you buy more quantity demanded. You increase your quantity demanded. So the income effect is the effect of a price change on something called real income. And real income, well, real income is measured by how much you can buy. So it's measured in terms of the goods and services you can buy. So let's take a look at this. If I'm buying 4 cases of beer at 20 bucks, that's 4 times 20 is 80. So I go to the store and I think I'm going to spend 80 bucks. But if I get there and they're on sale, in other words, the price has fallen to 18, then I only pay $72 for my 4 cases of beer, 72 instead of $80. So all of a sudden I'm $8 richer. That's an increase in real income because it allows me to potentially buy more beer. So when the price of something goes down, my real income actually increases, my ability to buy more real goods and services, and so I do. So that's called the income effect, and real income increases if prices fall, just because it puts more money in my pocket and I can afford to buy more stuff. So that's one reason that the curve slopes down and to the right, the demand curve. So the next reason is something called the substitution effect. So you picture, substitution is just substituting one thing for the other. So you picture your demand curve, downward slope to the right, and it's for beer. And if the price of beer increases, for example, well, I'm likely to substitute away and maybe buy wine, at least a little bit, because I can drink wine and beer and they're sort of substitutes. So if the price of beer increases, I'm likely to substitute away and buy some wine, and therefore I'll reduce my quantity demanded of beer because there is a substitute I can go to. So that's the substitution effect. Hang on for a second. So intuitively, it makes sense that, well, prices go down, people might buy more. That's the law of demand, and it causes that demand curve to be downward sloping to the right. But formally, we explain it using what we just said, the income effect and the substitution effect. Those are the reasons that it slopes down to the right. Okay, so we finished this section up by looking at something called market demand. Because if I'm a business out there, I don't really care what one person is going to buy. I care what the whole market is going to buy. So market demand is kind of the simplest thing. You just add up all the individual demands. So at a price of 18, Tamika will buy 6 cases of beer. At a price of 18, Abdi will buy 4 cases. And at a price of 18, Jan will buy 9. So I want to point out something. There's 3 quantities demanded, 3 quantity demandeds here, 6, 4, and 9, and they're all related to the price of 18. So when the price goes up to 19, Tamiko says, oh, I'll buy a little bit less. Abdi will still buy the same, and Jan will buy a little bit less. The price keeps going up all the way to 22. Tamiko says, hold on, I'm only buying 2. Abdi says, yeah, I'll reduce mine to 3. And Jan says, I'm only getting 1. That's just too expensive for me. So pause again. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 quantity demandeds. But right now, there's 3 demands. Tamiko's price-quantity relationship, Abdi's price-quantity relationship is the second demand curve, and Jan's price-quantity relationship is the third demand curve. But let's add them all up. Here, we go 9 plus 6 is 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. The market demand curve says quantity demanded is 19. Here it's 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 plus 5. The market demand curve says quantity demanded is 16 for the market. Here it's 6 plus 4 is 10 plus 4 is 14. The demand curve says market quantity demanded is 14. Here we add those 3, 6, 9. Here we add this is 6. So now we've got one more demand curve, and that's where we use prices again and everybody's demand together. So we have the market demand curve by just adding up all the individual demand curves. So let's clear this, move to the next, and we see the graphs. So in this graph, we take a peek and we see we've got our individual demand curves. There's Abdi, there's Tamiko, there's Jan, and all we do is we add them all up horizontally. We add all up the quantities just like we did on the table, and we get the market demand curve. So the market demand curve is really just the horizontal sum of all the individual demand curves. And that's what we look at, right? We're not really caring too much about an individual demand curve. It's kind of a theoretical thing. We just want to see the market demand curve, which has the same price quantity demanded relationship. It's downward sloping as well. So that's it for demand. We add up all the individual demands, we get the market demand. And if we have a table, it's the same thing. We add up all the individual demands on the table to get the market demand in a table. So the price quantity relationship is the same whether we're looking at the graph or whether we're looking at the table. In the next segment in this chapter, we're going to explain supply. And once we explain supply, we'll follow that up, putting demand and supply together, and then start working with it. That's where the fun starts. So we'll see you when we get there.